Let's talk about what your organization needs to do within the first 90 days of receiving a new grant. And this applies to all grants, all grant types, all funding sources. Whether that's a federal grant, state grant, foundation grant, corporate grant, local grant, regardless of where the grant comes from or the funding source or entity, you want to make sure you do these 4 things within the first 90 days so you have a solid foundation and can manage this grant successfully throughout its life. The first thing you want to do, and it might seem kind of obvious, is read through the grant agreement thoroughly. It's a dense document, so you might not be able to get through it in one session. Take notes on it, highlight it, however it is that you want to retain the information, make sure you do that. But, break it up into sections if you need to. You might not want to go through everything in one sitting. You might want to, do a couple pages here, a couple pages in a couple hours, a couple pages tomorrow. But make sure you read through the entire grant agreement because, 70, 80% of your questions and your team's questions to be answered right there in the grant agreement and sometimes in the proposal itself. So read through that grant agreement. The second thing is to set up a budget tracker. And this budget tracker is a tracker that's separate than your organization's, ERP or financial tracker. Your organization might use a program like PeopleSoft, might use Financial Edge, might use Sage. But this budget tracker that you or your budget manager, your finance manager will create is something that's separate than that. So that way with your budget tracker, you can track your expenditures, you can make any projections that you need, and then you can reconcile your numbers with the numbers that are in the organization's system tracker. So set up a budget tracker. Now, the third thing is to build what I like to call a compliance system. You want to have calendar reminders for all of your reports, programmatic reports, financial reports, final reports to the funder. You also want to have calendar reminders for all your payments. So a lot of times you'll have a payment schedule where the funder won't give you all the funds up front, but they'll break it up into different payments, into separate payments. So you want to have reminders for when to expect those payments. And then finally, you want to have what I like to call a folder ecosystem, where you want to have, different documents that are pertinent to that grant in different folders, things like the grant proposal, the grant agreement itself, any no cost extensions, any invoices, any quotes from different vendors. You want to have those things organized in folders and then give your team access, or the people on your team who need to have access to those folders, give them access to those folders as well. Now, the fourth thing you want to do within the first 90 days of receiving a grant is to schedule an internal kickoff meeting. And this kickoff meeting is going to include anybody who touches the grant on a regular basis. So, the program manager, the grant manager or finance manager, the PI or principal investigator, anybody who's going to touch this grant on a regular basis. And so you want to go through in this meeting, you want to go through lessons learned from previous grants. You want to go through any questions that you or your team have. You want to write down any questions that you can't answer. So then that way, when you talk to the funder, you can ask those questions to the funder. And you just want to make sure everybody has a clear understanding of their responsibilities, of their expectations and their roles. So that way, when you start managing the grant, when the grant launches, everybody understands their roles, everybody understands what's expected of them, and you can manage this grant successfully. So the steps that your organization takes within the first 90 days of receiving a new grant is critical in making sure that you put things in place to run this grant and manage this grant successfully. So that includes, reading through the grant agreement thoroughly. That includes creating a budget tracker. That includes creating a compliance system. And then finally, setting or scheduling a kickoff meeting with your entire internal team so everybody understands their roles and their responsibilities and expectations. So if you have any questions about this or anything else pertaining to managing a budget and managing a grant, reach out to me directly, and I'll talk to you soon.